All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first session of the fall 2025 semester of Emerald Ash Borer University. My name is Bob Bruner. I am the exotic forest pest educator with the Department of Entomology at Purdue University, and today we are hosting Dr. Alicia Kelley and Vince Burkle. Alicia is a member of the entomology department here at Purdue, and Vince works for Indiana DNR's Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology. Today, they're going to be talking to us a little bit about some of the programs that they run and how they impact what happens here in Indiana. Alicia, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the invite. So yes, as Bob said, we're going to be talking about exotic pest monitoring programs in Indiana, and specifically some of the survey work that we do here in the state and how some of that works and a little bit about the history. And then Vince is going to talk about how some of these programs support exports. It's on the ship. There we go. So I wanted to first talk about all of the different groups that contribute to surveys, specifically in Indiana. In other states, this might look a little different, but here this is a very broad breakdown of all of the folks that contribute. So first, the USDA APHIS has personnel here. They do some of their own survey work, and they also provide the funding. So a lot of the funding that we use for surveys comes from them, and they distribute that to the states. And in our case, this goes to the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. In other states, this might be their Department of Agriculture or something else, but here in Indiana, it's our DNR, and this goes to the Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology, also the Division of Forestry. The Division of Forestry actually also does some surveys, and they coordinate with the U.S. Forest Service as well, a little bit on some of their work. I'll mention very briefly what the Division of Forestry looks at the end. And Purdue is also involved. So as Bob said, I'm actually a member of Purdue Entomology. So in Indiana, the DNR contracts Purdue University to perform some of the survey work. We in entomology, like I do some of the survey work, and we also provide identification services and screening. And the Department of Botany and Plant Pathology does a lot of our disease screening. So this is somewhat unique. Other states don't do it this way necessarily. Like those of us who contract universities, there's only a few of us, but this is the way it works here. And that's why, as the CAPS coordinator, I'm at Purdue. So I wanted to start with a little bit of history as to why we do these surveys, where do they come from, and what used to be the case before we did surveys in the United States. So prior to the 1980s, we didn't have a national system for monitoring invasive pests. If you're familiar with some of the history of exotic pest invasions before this time, a lot of those stories will go something like, well, we just brought it over here. And there wasn't really a lot of national coordination for monitoring for these and preventing them from getting here. There was a system where states could report voluntarily. So the USDA would send out these postcards asking states for information, and depending on what they got back, they would send out a bulletin to everyone kind of detailing what they found on those voluntary postcards. So you could kind of imagine, like, this wasn't a very good system for communication. It wasn't easy to know what was happening on a national level. This is kind of what one of those bulletins looked like. If you're interested in, old government history, I think this stuff is neat. But this was an old bulletin from 1942 about Japanese beetle. So this is kind of how it worked back then, prior to the 80s. And then, at some point we kind of realized this system isn't very efficient. It's not working very well. There wasn't very good communication. And so there was this group, the Inter-Society Consortium for Plant Protection. This was kind of a group of scientists and think tanks, and they got together and kind of identified the need for a cooperative effort between federal and state agencies. So this group created the Cooperative National Plant Pest Survey and Detection Program. This was kind of the precursor to the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey. They first started this in just 16 states. This was kind of their pilot of this program. And then in just a few years, it grew to all 50 states. And then a few years later, they rebranded it to CAPS, which is what we call it today. So that's a little bit of history on the Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey. And then I also wanted to mention PPA 7721, which is another arm of our funding and our survey work. This funding comes through the Plant Protection Act. It was signed in 2000. So this was a larger bill. It was actually part of a larger act, but essentially this provided a lot of regulation. So it regulates the import, export, interstate movement of all plants, pests, and weeds. So this provided a lot of framework for what we do today. Section 7721 specifically, this was actually made available later through the Farm Bill in 2008 and 2014. And the funding provided through that gives us more opportunities to get funding for survey work and also for other work like research, for outreach and things like that. Anything that's kind of related to protection from invasive species. This funding is different from the CAPS funding in that it's competitive. So the CAPS funding is a guaranteed amount of money that the USDA provides. 7721 is competitive, so states apply to this and request funding under this act. So what are our goals with these pest surveys? The first goal is the early detection of pests. So if an invasive species gets into the country, we want to find it as soon as possible. And this allows us to respond as soon as possible and ideally prevent it from getting out of hand. It also supports our phytosanitary certifications, and Vince is going to talk more about that later, so I won't spend any time on that right now. And the other is to provide results to a centralized public database. So I mentioned that communication between the states previously was not very good to know what was coming in to other states. Like we weren't really talking to each other. And so one of the goals of our surveys is to provide that data to a national database. And this is public information, so we can foster that communication between states. And every year we submit all of our data in Indiana to NAPIS. This is a centralized database for all of our survey results. But what I'm really going to focus on for the rest of my presentation is this goal here, the early detection of pests. So just to give a little background here on how pest detection works as it kind of relates to things coming into this country, right? So the import requirements for anything that comes into the United States, those requirements are set by the USDA. This can be any number of things. It can be that, these commodities have to be treated a certain way. They have to be free of diseases or pests, certified to be free of those. There's a lot of different things that could be. And all of those things are set by the USDA. So our first line of defense against exotic invasives is when those things come in, Customs and Border Patrol protection, agriculture specialists inspect all of those commodities that come in. So these folks are really on the front line of looking for anything that could be coming in on these commodities. However, only 2% of these goods are visually inspected, and that's just, practically speaking, there's just too many things coming in, not enough people. It's a really difficult thing to look at every single thing coming in, and that's even more so now with direct-to-consumer purchases online. I won't even get into that, but it's just a very difficult thing to do. And so the surveys really come in as the second line of defense. So some things that get past this process, we are out there looking for anything that could be coming through. And we're actually out in the environments where they could be escaping into. So again, our goal here is finding them early so that we can respond as quickly as possible. So now I'm going to go into our surveys and just very quickly go over the pests that we look for. And my goal isn't to belabor any of these pests and bog down with a lot of detail about their biology, but just to give you a glimpse into all of the things out there that could be a threat to our resources. There's a lot of invasives that are already here, and I think sometimes people don't realize how many threats are out there that are not here. And we have to be actively looking for those to prevent them from getting here. So in the field crop survey, this is part of our CAPS work. This is primarily done in corn and soybean in Indiana. My first group here is my group of brown moths. I learned this morning that a group of moths is called an eclipse. So this is my eclipse of brown moths that we monitor for in corn and soybean. These are a lot of very aggressive pests. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on just a couple of these in a slide or two. But in general, these are pests of corn and soy both. There's a couple that are specific, but these are pretty significant pests in other countries where they occur. We also do sampling for a couple of other pests, like this cucurbit beetle and small brown plant hopper. The cucurbit beetle is a pest of corn and soybean. It's very common in South America. The small brown plant hopper is primarily a pest of wheat, actually, and it can transmit a viral disease. So we monitor for that in corn. And this beetle, the Capra beetle, this is actually a new one for 2026 that we're going to be looking for. This is a stored grain pest. It's a very, very significant pest, causes a lot of damage. So we're going to start monitoring for this one. In field crops, we also look for a couple of weeds, red witchweed and yellow witchweed. I think it's fairly obvious from the photos which one is which here. These are actually parasitic weeds. So they will parasitize grass or legumes. So the red one parasitizes grass, so we monitor that on corn. And the yellow parasitizes legumes, and so we monitor for that on soybean. So witchweeds are actually here in the United States, but they've been contained for a long time. They actually showed up initially in 1955 in North Carolina, and there was a really vigorous eradication campaign, and it was very successful. They've actually reduced the effective area by 99%. It was initially about 450,000 acres that was infested with this, and we're down to just over 3,000 acres now. So it's a low likelihood that this would establish, but because it's here and it's in the United States, we do go ahead and monitor for this. It's a real easy visual survey. So we scan plants at the end of the season for this weed. And then there are several diseases that we monitor for. So these primarily come through the botany and plant pathology, the plant pest and diagnostic lab here at Purdue, and they monitor for these diseases on samples that come through their lab and provide us with diagnostic data. These are all exotic diseases, and so as they're through their normal diagnostic process, they're able to determine the presence or absence of these diseases. So I wanted to just have an aside for a couple of the moths on my list, a couple of the more significant ones. So one of the moths that we monitor for very aggressively is the silver Y moth. This has a very wide host range. It's a very serious pest of tomato, corn, soybean, cereal crops as well. So I primarily monitor for this in corn and soy, of course, and we also monitor for it in other crops. So the caterpillar, of course, is the main cause of damage, which is true for all lepidopteran pests. This is primarily found in Europe and a lot of the Mediterranean regions where it causes a lot of damage. So just a really quick about these maps. The maps that I have on here are provided by the European and Mediterranean Plant Protection Organization, and they provide presence or absence detection data. So this does not necessarily mean that this pest is widespread or established in all of these spots, but in a lot of cases, this is the only maps that you can find for some of these, so they're still useful, but I just want to point that out so that people realize what they're looking at here. So we monitor for this moth a lot in Indiana. This could be really detrimental to a lot of important commodities we grow here. The other one we monitor for very extensively is Old World bollworm. This has a huge host range, feeds on over 200 plant species. Corn and soy are major hosts for this. It also feeds on a lot of other vegetables. So this is one that is very, very important to us, of course, as major corn and soy growers in the country. And this pest actually looks very, very similar to another pest that we already have, the corn earworm, Helicoverpa zea. But unlike zea, well, not completely unlike zea, but this one is known to have resistance to pests and Bt, and that's becoming true of zea as well. But this one is known to be very resistant to chemical control, and in the areas where it occurs, it's very difficult to control. It's estimated to cause $2 billion in annual losses to crops in Asia, Africa, Europe, and Australia. It's extremely detrimental. And another reason that we're specifically concerned about it here in Indiana is that the past few years, it's been frequently intercepted at the Chicago airport. Now, when I say intercepted, that means that it's been found in traps, but so far it has not been found in a field. So again, one of these distribution maps, as you can see, this pest is just about everywhere except for North and Central America. So it's very common around the world, and so there's a lot of places it could be coming into the country. So this is one of the pests that we have the most traps out for, and the USDA also does their own survey for this because of how important it is. The next survey that falls under CAPS is our nursery and ornamental survey. So this survey is primarily done through the DNR. So it's under CAPS, but the DNR inspectors who are visiting nurseries provide all of the labor for this survey. So again, we're surveying for Old World bollworm again, just highlighting how important this pest is because it can also be on vegetables and again, over 200 plants. We also look for it through the nursery trade. Another important one that we look for is box tree moth. So Bob has some great presentations already on box tree moth, so I encourage you to go back and look at those if you want to learn more about it. But it is close by in Michigan and Ohio, so we monitor for this one a lot in Indiana. We also monitor for several diseases through the nursery survey. Boxwood blight and sudden oak death are two important ones that we look for. These are two that are really important for phytosanitary certificates, which Vince will talk about later. A new one we're going to be looking for is this Phytophthora cordoviae. We haven't looked for this one yet, but it has a very similar host range to Phytophthora ramorum. So we're going to start adding this to our survey. This is actually a disease of beech and rhododendrons. So it's currently present in some South American countries, in the UK and New Zealand, and it's becoming really important. So we're going to add this to our list. So next, I'm going to just briefly go over the exotic wood borer and bark beetle survey. This survey is now run through entirely through PPA 7721. So we have a large group of wood borers in this survey. There are a couple species of Monocamus. These wood borers carry parasitic nematodes that cause diseases in trees. Asian longhorn beetle is a really important one. So again, this is one I believe Bob has other EABU presentations on if you're interested in more detail about this pest, but this one is present in the United States as well. So we conduct visual surveys around Indiana to look for this one. And citrus longhorn beetle is another important pest. It sounds by the name of it that it only attacks citrus, but it also attacks things like apples. So we also look for that one in Indiana. We also have a collection of little bark beetles and ambrosia beetles that we look for. These are really important pests that can spread fungal diseases, and they cause a lot of feeding damage on trees. There's a lot of these that we look for here. Just to highlight a couple, the red bay ambrosia beetle is a really important one that's very common in the southeast United States right now and has been moving north. And primarily here in Indiana, we're concerned about this on sassafras, and it moves the fungal pathogen that causes laurel wilt disease. Walnut twig beetle is another one that's important here. We've actually found it before, but not in a long time. And so we continue to monitor for that to hopefully establish that we're free of it. And many other species here that are really important pests of softwoods and would cause a lot of damage if they were to get into our state. Oak processionary moth, as the name implies, is a pest of oak. It gets its name because the caterpillars form these kind of processions, if you will, where they'll crawl in this line. And they cause feeding damage to the tree. They're defoliators. They also have these little hairs that can cause really severe allergic reactions to people because the wind will pick up those hairs and can cause a lot of problems for humans. Thousand cankers disease, this one is spread by the walnut twig beetle. And so those two are associated with each other. We monitor for both the disease and the beetle. And this fungus, I believe, has also been detected in Indiana before, but not at the same time as the beetle. So we haven't found it in a while, if I'm correct, if I'm not mistaken about that. But again, we continue to monitor for these to establish that we're free of it and hopefully get off a regulatory list. I believe we've been on one for a while. Vince can correct me if I'm wrong about that in a little while. But this is another one that is really important to monitor for and keep ahead of. And our specialty crop survey kind of encompasses our many of the different commodities that we grow in Indiana. So again, silver moth is on this list as it was with the field crops, but in this survey, we monitor for it primarily in vineyards. Box tree moth, again, we monitor for this one under the specialty crop survey. And in the CAPS survey, it's at retail outlets primarily. And then in this one, it's in like kind of large nursery greenhouse areas. And same with boxwood blight. In the CAP survey, it's primarily retail. And then we also have more survey for this in nursery settings. So again, these are really important pests. So we have them in multiple different surveys so that we can cover more ground with them. Just to highlight a couple of other species on our list, of course, spotted lanternfly. This is a really important one that we've been discussing a lot in Indiana as it's been spreading. Bob has a lot of programming on this invasive. This is the most recent map from the DNR website as to where it's found currently in Indiana. So we are continuing to monitor for this. The funding for this also supports treatments and outreach that we use to spread the word about this and educate the public. And a little bit on, so the Division of Forestry in DNR also does surveys, as I mentioned earlier. So a few things that they look for: spongy moth. This one is here in Indiana, primarily in the northern part of the state. And they do a lot of trapping for this species, as well as a lot of treatments for it. Again, the thousand cankers disease and walnut twig beetle group, this one, the Division of Forestry also surveys for. And another one that they look for is beech leaf disease. So this is actually caused by a nematode, this disease. And it is spreading westward. It kind of initially invaded in the East Coast and is starting to move in our direction. And it causes this interveinal chlorosis in beech. And so as you can see here, it's here in the US and it's starting to move towards us. So this is another one that we look for. And just a few other things I wanted to just briefly highlight. We also do a survey for honeybee health. So we have an inspector that goes out and samples honeybees. Those are sent out to a lab to test for all kinds of diseases, viral, fungus, bacterial, etc. And we're also going to be doing a cardinal bunt survey next year. So that was a really quick kind of blowing through a lot of these things. But again, I hope that it just highlights all of the different things that are out there and the work that's being done to prevent these from getting in. So the next goal that we have with these surveys to support our export requirements. So this is where I'm going to turn it over to Vince.
Thanks, Alicia. Let me get my screen shared here. Okay. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yep.
Good. All right, so I'm gonna kind of jump into the export certification part of this, and so it's kind of what we're going to talk about here today is, first off, what is export certification? And then I'm going to go into why we do this. Why do we have to certify things for export purposes, and who does those inspections? And then I'm going to just talk about how these surveys support trade. And then I'm going to kind of walk through the process of certifying a commodity from the point in when we get an application to when we issue the phytosanitary certificate. So, got to move some stuff around here because my buttons are covered up. So, give me just a minute. All right, so what is export certification? So first, it's the process of certifying a plant-based commodity. So that commodity then meets the entry requirements of that particular country. So these plant-based commodities can be logs, they can be lumber, they can be seed, grain. But at the same time, not all plant-based commodities are eligible for a phytosanitary certificate. For example, like a can of green beans, they're plant-based, but since they're canned, they've been kind of processed, they are not eligible. Same thing for like cardboard. Cardboard is not eligible, and like microwave popcorn. Microwave popcorn is in a bag. It's got all the ingredients in there to be ready to go. It's got the oil and seasoning, so that is not eligible for certification and a phytosanitary certificate. The other thing is each country has different requirements. So as just an example, say a company wants to send white oak logs overseas. So let's say if those are going to Vietnam, if we go in and look up the requirements for a phytosanitary certificate for white oak logs to Vietnam, the only thing that is needed is the certificate itself, and they need to be inspected and need to be free of soil and major insect pests. However, if those logs were to go to, say, China, those requirements are different. They still would need to be free of pests and soil, but white oak logs going to China need to either be fumigated with methyl bromide, or they need to have a heat treatment so where the core temperature reaches a certain temperature for a certain time threshold. So each country has their own different kind of requirement, and that's based on the commodity itself. The other thing about certification is it not only applies to exports, but it also applies to interstate movement of plant commodities. So, for example, if a nursery here in Indiana wants to ship live plants to California, they would need to meet those requirements that California has set up. So they may have pests of concern there in California that they don't want there, and we would need to look up their requirements. And so plants going to California would need to be free of things like spotted lanternfly, spongy moth, Japanese beetle, Colorado potato beetle, European corn borer, and it could be several other insects as well. So each state, especially West Coast states, have a little bit more stricter requirements than, say, East Coast states do, because they don't have a lot of the insects out there on the West Coast that we do here. So why are we conducting these inspections? Well, the main reason is to facilitate trade, to make it easier for some of these commodities to get from point A to point B. We also want to make sure that we're not spreading insects or disease problems to other countries. So we want to protect not only our own natural resources, but theirs as well. And we want to have an enhancement of or we want to be able to enhance the appreciation of the environment. So those are some of the main reasons. Those are the three main reasons that we're conducting these inspections. But the very main one is to make sure that we can get a commodity from point A to point B a little bit easier. So as far as who's conducting these inspections, well, first off, it starts with USDA, APHIS PPQ. They have plant protection and quarantine officers in every state who conducts inspections. It may be at a port, or it may be at the facility that's exporting the commodity. But they would go in there and they would perform inspections on site. Also, DNR, Division of Entomology and Plant Pathology, we work alongside USDA and assist them with inspections at various places such as log yards, lumber yards, grain facilities, seed producing companies. So we assist them with that. We have a memorandum of understanding with them and we assist them with that. FGIS, which is the Federal Grain Inspection Service, they also do inspection of grain and they help facilitate the export of grain products. And they might go into some of the larger grain elevators to do inspections, but they also do some of the smaller grain companies as well. So they go in there and they perform those inspections. We also have Indiana Crop Improvement, or ICIA, and they perform growing season inspections of field crops. Because a lot of countries will require a growing season inspection for certain diseases. So we can use an inspection report from ICIA to help with the certification of a commodity going to a certain country. So how do these surveys support trade? Well, basically, when we're performing a survey for a given, maybe it's a plant disease or an insect, if we get negative data back from that survey, then that basically shows that that pest does not occur here in Indiana or maybe within an area within Indiana. So therefore, we can say that that pest does not occur. So for example, you use carnal bunt survey. That's a survey that's done here in Indiana, previously done by USDA, and we're kind of moving forward with that here, going on, as Alicia said, in 2026. But carnal bunt is a smut type disease that affects wheat, and the fungus that causes carnal bunt it infects the wheat kernel. And so products that are made with that wheat that's infested with carnal bunt can kind of give off a fishy odor, but otherwise they're harmless. But the main reason is, if you're making flour out of carnal bunt infested wheat, it's going to kind of have a fishy odor. It's really not going to be a product that you would want to use. So we want to try to make sure that that doesn't happen. But for this survey, what we would do is we would arrange with, say, a grain facility that receives wheat from a lot of different surrounding counties within Indiana, so that we can go collect a sample from there. And we do this as soon as possible after harvest to make sure there's, we're able to collect as best a sample as we possibly can from a lot of different counties. And so following, there's a protocol, a survey manual, a Carnal Bunt survey manual that USDA has that we need to follow. And we would go into that grain facility that has the wheat, and we would collect a composite sample of a little bit over 4 pounds or so of some of the wheat. We would place that wheat in sort of a sturdy paper bag here. And then we would also need to pull out about a 250 gram subsample of that as a retainer in case they need to do some retesting of that grain. So, but after we have our 4 pound sample there, we have to label it and fill out the proper forms to make sure that the integrity of the sample is maintained. And then we package it up and we send it off to the lab to be tested. So depending on how busy this lab might be, it could take anywhere from a few days to several weeks to do the testing. But then once we get a negative test result back, we can then certify shipments of wheat from Indiana to countries that regulate carnal bunt, and we can certify them as free of carnal bunt. So let's just go walk through kind of an example of how that would look when we receive a phytosanitary application for, say, wheat seed to Canada. So what the applicant would do is they would go into the USDA phytosanitary certificate issuance and tracking system to apply for a PPQ form 577, which is a federal phytosanitary certificate. So in USDA's system here, we can then log in and then we can view the application that the exporter has submitted. So if you can kind of look at this application here that's popped up, you can see that the exporter here is exporting from, or the company is from Plymouth, Indiana. We have an applicant, which is from Princeton, Minnesota, which in this case, it's usually like the logistics company or the trucking company that's going to ship the seed or works with the exporter to help move the commodity. And then we have the consignee here, who is in Palmerston, Ontario, Canada. So this is the company that the seed is going to in Canada. And then we also have where the seed here is available here in Indiana for the inspection. So we can look at this and go, okay, this is seed that's in Woodburn, Indiana. And we know then which inspector needs to go take a look at this. This is actually a fairly small amount of seed here, 5 pounds of seed. So this is probably just seed trials going up into Canada or maybe something for a breeding program. It's going to be in one box. Shows that the certified origin here is in Indiana. And then just some destination information and how the product is going to be moved. So after we look at this application and we know where it's going, so we know it's going to Palmerston, Ontario, Canada, we can go over here and we can click on the phytosanitary export database, which can tell us the requirements for wheat seed to Canada. So once we go into the phytosanitary export database and we look up wheat seed to Canada, it gives us the information about where the seed, or it lists information about where the seed is originating from. So is it originating from Arizona? No, it's originating from another state, not listed here on the list, which is, of course, Indiana. We click on this and it brings up the requirements for seed from all those other states, which includes Indiana. So if we look at the requirements here, we can see that a phytosanitary certificate is required. That's pretty basic. But it also has these other additional requirements here below. So one of the first requirements here is the seed is free from spores of Tilletia indica on the basis of official lab testing. So Tilletia indica is carnal bunt. That's a scientific name. So we've done a survey, so we can also look here and see the seed originated in an area free from Tilletia indica on the basis of official surveys. So, okay, we've done an official survey, so we can meet that requirement here in Indiana for freedom for carnal bunt. But we also have a few other diseases that we have to have freedom from here. So if we move on down the list here, we see we need to have freedom from Tilletia controversa on the basis of official lab testing or on the basis of official surveys. So Tilletia controversa is dwarf bunt. It's another type of smut disease that we don't survey for it here in Indiana. So with this disease, we would have to do a lab test. If we move on down here, we see also freedom from Urocystis agripyrae, either through lab testing or survey. Urocystis agripyrae is flag smut. We don't have an official survey here in Indiana for this disease either, so we have to do lab testing. So what this means is we have to take a sample of this 5 pound of wheat to send in for lab testing for both of these diseases. However, if we move on down here below, we see additional information down here below. And if we look here, if destined to Ontario, which is where this particular certificate is going, we do not have to have freedom from dwarf bunt if it's going east of Thunder Bay. Well, so where is Thunder Bay? Well, so if we look here, Thunder Bay is up here off the northern shore of Lake Superior, kind of off the tip of Minnesota. Ontario, Palmerston, Ontario, Canada, where this is going is clear over here north of Cleveland, Ohio, across the lake area. So this is definitely east of Thunder Bay. So after reviewing all these requirements, we can say that we have freedom from carnal bunt through official surveys. We don't need to really worry about dwarf bunt freedom because this is going east of Thunder Bay. And the reason is because they have dwarf bunt up here in this area of Canada, so we don't really need to meet a requirement up there. The only thing we need to do is collect a sample to send into an official lab to test for flag smut. So we would gather our sample, package it up, have an official sample, send it off to the lab. And again, the lab may take generally about a week to 10 days to get the results back. Once we get those results back, we can issue our phytosanitary certificate. So this is what the phytosanitary certificate looks like. It basically lists all the information up here that we have. It's got the date of inspection. It's got the name of our exporter. It's got the name of our consignee here in Palmerston, Ontario, Canada. Lists the amount of seed that's going, the quantity declared, the scientific name, botanical name, the number of packages, and it's got our additional declarations down here that we are free of Tilletia indica on the basis of official surveys, and then the seed is free of Urocystis agripyrae, which is flag smut, based on lab testing. So that's basically kind of a walkthrough of how we do a phytosanitary certificate from the point of when it's submitted in the PSIT system until we actually issue the certificate. And we issue a lot of certificates here in the state of Indiana. So especially recently, we're doing over 3,000 certificates a year. This year, up through about September, we've done about 2,500, almost 2,600, and I'm sure that's pushing close to 3,000 already. And again, these are all for a lot of different commodities. These are just some of the commodities that we have certified since the first of the year. Over 10 million board feet of walnut lumber, over 4 million board feet of white oak logs, 3.8 million pounds of wheat seed, 5.6 million pounds of corn seed, 36 million pounds of corn grain, and some of the other commodities, include things like tobacco and veneer, soybeans. And speaking of veneer, in the whole U.S., there's like 12 veneer mills in the entire country. Half of those veneer mills are here in Indiana. So that is a huge export commodity for us here in the state. And these commodities are just going all over the world. We ship to China, Vietnam, Australia, Mexico, the European Union, Canada. So a lot of these commodities they're going all over the place. So I hope that's kind of given you all some insight on how our surveys kind of help with export certification. And I appreciate you all listening today, and I thank you for your time.